Hello and welcome to the 25th installment of Aaron Walker Art Talk. I am, of course, Aaron Walker, and today I am joined by Rebecca Zeines, who is a Praxis alum and a freelance editor at the Foundation for Economic Education. Rebecca, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Well, that's great to hear. Today you have chosen Man at Work. Why don't you go and explain why?
So I was immediately called to it because I looked at what looked like a 20-something-year-old lounging and smoking a cigarette, and the title was Man at Work. And that felt like the stereotype of the quintessential millennial. And I am very vocal about that whole conversation and topic and stereotypes. So,
would you be surprised to hear that this was originally entitled Self-Portrait?
If you're a millennial, I'm really not.
Right. Well, okay. So this one is an example of of the spontaneous method that I've kind of described in other episodes. So I didn't start with a preconceived notion of like, oh, this painting is going to look like this, right? I just started by making shapes, and then somewhere along that method, you have an idea of where you're going. And so you start filling in detail that way. This one was kind of more inspired along like the Picasso, like not really cubist necessarily, but like exaggerated proportions.
Yeah.
The hand is massive. It's the same size as the head. The perspective is weird. You can see directly behind the guy. There's a wall that doesn't really make sense. And then there's trees. So that's kind of how I approached this one.
Yeah, well, the aesthetic also called out to me because my father paints and draws, and he has forever. And so that style was also reminiscent of some of the pieces that he creates that I happen to really like.
Well, he sounds so talented.
That is in no way directed towards you.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Well, great. Rebecca, do you have any questions about this piece?
So when you say that it is a self-portrait, why did you change the title?
Well, I thought that, so the title is like ironic, or it's like a joke, right? It's like a man at work, but he's clearly not at work. He's just lounging and smoking a cigarette. I don't want to say that I changed it because it would reflect poorly on me, but I don't know. I think it's just it adds like a layer of meaning to the picture, right? And also it's not really a self-portrait. It wasn't conceived of as a self-portrait. Self-portrait was also just another joke.
Yeah, I very much like this piece. I like the colors in it, and I like the fact that it's messing with perspective, especially since I know that for many artists that the distance and proportion and distance of how would you call it in English? In French, it's raccourci. It's the fact that like when you have someone who's bent up in a certain posture, their knees look out of proportion based on the rest of their body. And I know that that's actually a challenge. So doing that intentionally is clearly a device in the art that I happen to really appreciate.
Oh, that's very cool. And it's something I don't typically play with, right? So typically my pictures are, for people, it's typically just like a portrait at the chest, going up, little clearance above the head.
Yeah, I also noticed that, and the full body effect was also something that called out to me. And then I like the contrast of the title and the actual art piece.
but yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with that French term, and hopefully you can send it to me in the chat and I can look it up. But I mean, it's definitely something I'm playing with, right? Because you just have like basically every part of this picture is being like every quadrant is filled by like a body part.
Mm-hmm.
And so like this body is extended and like pulled and tugged in these different directions to fill up the whole frame. Right?
Yeah. And then again, it's like I just play on perspective is something that in art I always tend to appreciate. Just thinking back on one of my favorite pieces from my dad, the protagonist actually stands a little bit outside of the a painted line of the frame. And that effect here is again like reminiscent of what you created, and it's something that visually is enthralling to me.
Well, very cool. Rebecca, do you have any more questions on this particular piece?
So why did you want to make a joke about a man at work?
Well, I don't think that it necessarily, like, the impetus for that joke was, well, I'll say it like this. The method was not to have something in mind at the beginning, right? And not to have a reference picture or anything like that. So there wasn't an impetus for the joke. The joke came after the painting was done.
But why?
What do you mean, why? Why did I want to make it? I mean, it was just like coming up with a title for this thing, right? And I think that what the title is contrasted by the actual piece, right? Because that's what jokes are. It's contrast, and like I think that the whole sort of effect or theme of the piece is malaise or boredom or millennial nihilism, if I'm going to put it like in response to what you said. So yeah, I guess it would just be that contrast.
I am out of questions.
Well, that's totally fine. They were wonderful questions. So Rebecca, I'll see you in the next episode. Okay. Awesome.